For a man regularly pilloried for his beliefs and attitudes, vindication comes often to the Prince of Wales, long after he's been criticized for speaking out about the environment or education, or the plight of the marmoset. People often quietly concede that maybe he was right. Who knows, one day we may all be talking to our houseplants. The latest episode in which the prince's views on life have proved to be well-founded came this week with the publication of a series of letters from the Queen Mother. They support Charles's strongly voiced opinion that sending him to school at Gordonstoun in Scotland was a shockingly bad decision. In one letter, the wise old matriarch urgently counselled that her grandson should be spared the rigours of his proposed boarding school, and sent instead to Eton, just a few miles from Windsor Castle. In May 1961, when Charles was 12, she wrote to the Queen, "I suppose he will be taking his entrance exam for Eton soon. I do hope he passes because it might be the ideal school for one of his character and temperament." She added, "All your friends' sons are at Eton, and it is so important to be able to grow up with people you will be with later in life, and so nice and so important when boys are growing up that you and Philip can see him during school days and keep in touch with what is happening. He would be terribly cut off and lonely in the far north." She wasn't wrong, but as with so many other suggestions which flowed sweetly from her pen at that time, the Queen Mother was beginning to find that her influence, which had surrounded, protected and carried her daughter through the death of King George Virgin Islands US and onto the throne 9 years earlier, was waning. Her son-in-law, Prince Philip, had been given the job of running the family while the Queen ran affairs of state, and Philip, a gleaming product of the Herefordshire school himself, thought it was just the place to bring out the best in a son who would one day be king. History, however, might judge that, in making this crucial call, Philip failed to see that his own child's upbringing and needs were so very different from his own. While Philip had a runaway father and distraught mother and was sent from pillar to post, thus making Gordonstoun the home he no longer had and the family he wished he had, his son Charles enjoyed a much more stable upbringing, rooted as it was in the rituals and certainties of royal life. He had not one home, but several. He had not only a mother but a nanny, Mabel Anderson, whom he loved. There was money, there was warmth and comfort, and there was predictability, all helping underpin an unsure, small boy's life. What his father apparently failed to detect, or didn't care to, was that his son was sensitive and gentle-natured. To be cast into the hurly-burly of public school life from a sheltered childhood would be difficult enough. To be sent to one of the toughest schools in Britain was a ghastly mistake. A prison sentence, was how Charles later described it. Colditz with kilts, like penal servitude, agreed William Boyd, the best-selling novelist and screenwriter and a Gordonstoun contemporary of Charles. "I happen to know, from his own lips, that Prince Charles utterly detested it. He was bullied," recalled Ross Benson, the late Daily Mail correspondent who was also a contemporary. "He was crushingly lonely for most of his time there. The wonder is that he survived with his sanity intact." Charles was not entirely abandoned to his fate. Two cousins, Norton Knatchbull, now Lord Brabourne, and Prince Welf of Hanover, were parachuted in ahead of his arrival to pave the way and act as wingmen for the new pupil, but their presence did little to shield Charles from the unspeakable misery that lay ahead, for in preparation for the 13-year-old prince's arrival, a new set of rules had been hurriedly imposed on the previously libertarian school's regime. Smoking was suddenly a caning offence where formerly there had been no corporal punishment. Drinking, while not previously condoned, now carried the threat of expulsion. The changes had nothing to do with Charles, but Charles was blamed for their imposition, and he was to pay a heavy price, for the school was filled with toughs. Had the parents not been rich enough to pay the fees, a third higher than those at Eton, these pupils would probably have ended their educational careers in prison rather than at a public school, reflected Benson. The tough guy ethos of the school meant older boys routinely tyrannized their younger, weaker colleagues, beating them up, extorting food and money, rifling through letters and personal belongings. One felt in a way rather like a medieval peasant during the 100 Years' War, recalls Boyd. One never knew when another marauding army might march by, randomly distributing death and destruction. Prefects told their inferiors when to shave, when to polish their shoes, when to have their hair cut. One bunch of ruffians in a house called Hopeman Lodge hanged the cat belonging to their housemaster, Major Hebe Doughton. In another, The seniors greeted new boys by taking a pair of pliers to their arms and twisting until the flash tore open. It was into this demonic culture that Prince Charles was plunged in the summer term of 1962. He had come from his prep school, Cheam, in Hampshire, without the vaguest idea of what was about to hit him. Upon arrival, he found himself cold-shouldered by fellow pupils in his house, Windmill Lodge, because the housemaster had warned any antagonistic behavior towards the heir to the throne would result in immediate expulsion. As a result, recalled a fellow housemate, he was picked upon at once, maliciously, cruelly, and without respite. Jonathan Dimbleby, in his official biography of Charles, reveals that any boy who, in those early days, felt sympathy for the marginalized prince and tried to befriend him found themselves subjected to a barrage of slurping sounds suggesting that the boy was sucking up to the prince. Few withstood that humiliation for long, and would retreat. Boyd recalls too, the brutal treatment handed out to Charles on the rugby pitch, where within weeks it became a matter of honor to crush the prince at every opportunity. He remembers overhearing boys crowing, "We did him over, we just punched the future king." Meanwhile, Charles was writing home to the Queen, "I hardly get any sleep in the house because I snore and I get hit on the head all the time. It's absolute hell." So the Queen Mother had been proved right, but she never learned the anguish her grandson suffered under the brutish Gordonstoun regime, where all boys wore shorts whatever the weather, slept on hard bunks with the windows open even in winter, and were made to take long walks in the rain as punishment for misdemeanors. And after 2 years at the school, Charles was as much under pressure as the day he joined. "The people in my dormitory are foul," he wrote home. "They throw slippers all night long or hit me with pillows. Last night was hell, literal hell. I wish I could come home." There were further humiliations. Dimbleby reveals, Charles was mocked relentlessly about his ears, which were larger than average and somewhat protruding. He had no defenses available to him, save a stubborn refusal to complain either to the perpetrators or to his housemaster. Charles had virtually no reference points with his fellow pupils. The macho attitude adopted by many meant that, out of sight of their masters, boys smoked, drank, talked sex, traded pornographic magazines, borrowed cars to go joyriding and pilfered from local shops. This, to a sheltered young lad who wanted at that time in his life only to do the right thing, was alien to the point of lunacy. Yet his father did not see it, so Charles struggled dutifully on, head held high and lip buttoned tight. The Duke of Edinburgh had had a happy time at the school in the 30s, and he wrote his son bracing letters of admonition urging him to be strong and resourceful. This did not help, says Dimbleby grimly. On a sailing trip to the Isle of Lewis, a cinema visit to see a Jane Mansfield film had to be diverted to the local pub because of excessive public attention. Never having entered licensed premises before, Charles was startled to be asked by a barman what he would have. The fatal choice of a cherry brandy. He was 14, brought the world down around his ears because also in the bar was a freelance journalist who transmitted this innocent fact to the waiting world. In this picture of misery, perhaps most damaging of all is the fact that there were no girls at the school, and that the hardline headmaster, Robert Chew, made sure there never were. There was little homosexuality at Gordonstoun, recalled Benson. But there was very little heterosexuality either, and the school gave the prince no experience of dealing with women. Quite the contrary, to keep the royal virtue intact, the usual sources of female companionship had been carefully closed off. There was no fraternizing with the neighboring girls' schools, and, since Charles's arrival, the number of parental visits had been reduced, limiting the opportunities for meeting younger sisters. This was to have a lasting effect on a young man whose encounters with the opposite sex in the years immediately following his school days were perfunctory, embarrassing and rarely repeated. He cared about doing the right thing, said a contemporary at his Cambridge College, Trinity. He did not want to be caught with his pants down, for his parents' sake, but it meant he didn't see many girls. The knock-on effect was that by the time Charles met the sexually gregarious Camilla soon after leaving university, he was still woefully inexperienced, and from the moment she took him into her bed, he was smitten. At the age of 17, Charles was given a break from the numbing Scottish regimen with 2 terms at the Australian Outback School, Timbertop. It helped a great deal. "I took him out there a boy," said his acting equerry, David Checketts, "and brought back a man." His return to Gordonstoun was triumphant, first being appointed head of house, then guardian, head boy, of the school, in many ways, summed up Ross Benson. Charles was worthy of that responsibility placed upon him. He was honest, honorable and hard-working. If his judgment was sometimes flawed, he erred only on the side of compassion. Along the way, however, he had to acquire a hard veneer of self-absorption to protect the vulnerability that had been such a mark of his young character, but was now, forever, lost from sight. Whether, ultimately, had Charles gone to Eton, we should have ended up with such a complex character there's no way of knowing. What's certain is that he did his best in impossible circumstances, and therein lies an important key to the character and nature of our future king. Thank you for watching.